Hi, this is Zach. It's been a while since I've done anything but a flight video, so today I thought I'd have a chat about goggles. Not just my goggles, goggles in general. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I've been noticing a lot of new goggles coming on the market, and obviously a lot of reviews and opinion videos and preview videos. And it seems like a lot of people pick them up, take them out of the box, and dismiss them really early for not fitting them particularly well. So I wanted to make a point that you can do something about that in most cases. I certainly have had to. You'll see, my goggles here has several layers of foam on it, and the reason for that is quite early on I realized that the face plate that the Fatsharks come with and a few of the other brands come with is far too rounded for me. It obviously suits a lot of people, but for me, I've got a fairly flat forehead, which means if I was to use just a standard piece of foam that curves around this faceplate, then I find that my temples actually hit these edges and it becomes really uncomfortable. And then I end up with a lot of light leakage across the top because my forehead doesn't actually go all the way in. So I've done something about it. We're in a DIY kind of hobby. I've found that putting an old piece of foam in there and then layering another one on top. In this case, I've actually found a cheap Aomway foam kit, which is this vinyl covered stuff. And it works really well for me. I've had to chop it off at the sides because it was a little bit wider than these goggles. But I've been able to cater to my fairly flat forehead. It's brought my forehead out from the faceplate just enough that my temples don't actually press against the sides. I've put a bit of extra foam down the bottom, as you can see, around my nose, so that there's no light leakage from the bottom, there's no light leakage from the top, and because my cheekbones start not far below my eyes, it's nice and thin across the bottom corner here where my cheekbone starts. So have a think about it, have a look at yourself in the mirror and figure out what shape your head is. If you find that a lot of goggles don't fit, maybe you can do something about it like I have. Okay, that's as much as I need to say about that. The second thing I wanted to talk about was IPD. It's worthwhile knowing what your own physical IPD is, interpupillary distance. I urge you to actually grab a ruler, go admire yourself in a mirror, put the ruler up against the temple of your nose as comfortable as you're putting it close to your eyeballs, and actually knowing what your actual IPD is. I just did it again tonight just to confirm for myself what mine was, and it came out to be 59 millimeters, almost exactly. So you'd think, okay, physically I need an IPD of 59. I do. I'm using Dominator V2 goggles. They're rocking, little lenses, 32-degree field of view. They're advertised to have 57 millimeters of IPD. But it turns out when I've actually put a ruler to, from one corner to the other corner of the lens, physically they're actually 61.5 millimeters. And I've always felt that they were just a touch softer than I would have liked. And that little bit of difference, they're advertised as 57, but in reality they're actually 61.5. And I need an actual IPD of 59, so there's a 2.5 millimeter difference between my eyes and the minimum distance between these lenses. That actually does account for something. And it's something to take into account when you see the marketing and the spec sheets for all of the goggles since, because after these DOM V2s came, the DOM V3s, the HD 1s, 2s, HD 3s, the Fatshark SEs, and now the HDOs. And they're all based on the same casing, and they're all advertising a minimum IPD of 59. But I can guarantee you that with a larger lens and a larger field of view, if you were to measure the physical distance between one corner and the same corner of the opposite lens, there is no way the physical IPD would actually be 59 millimeters as Fatshark is advertising. I can guarantee you they will be between 63 and probably 66 millimeters. So people coming along with an actual IPD like me of 59 and trying on even the HDOs, which I did today, which are advertised to have an IPD of 59, can't quite get the image to line up, because in reality the IPD of the HDOs is probably about 63 to 64 millimeters against my eyeballs that need 59. So do take into consideration your physical IPD of your own eyes, and then take the time to actually get a ruler out and measure the distance between one corner and the same corner on the opposite lens of the goggles that you're trying, and actually discover for yourself whether or not the advertised IPD is actually even close to reality. Because certainly when I actually bought some Fatshark HD V2s with the huge 50-degree field of view, those IPDs, they were advertised as 59, but in reality I reckon they were probably 66 millimeters. 6 or 7 millimeters difference from my actual eyeballs. And there is no way I could get my eyes to line up with those. And no matter what I tried diopters, I was even considering drilling and modding and doing all sorts, I could never get them to focus right. And I know a lot of people have that same issue. Okay, so you've discovered that your goggles have a physical IPD slightly larger than you were expecting, and you now want to try to do something about it. In my case, as I was saying, these are actually the Dom V2s that have an IPD supposedly of 57, but in reality are 61.5 millimeters apart, and I want to get them as close to 59 as possible. And there is actually something you can do about it without having to hack into the goggles and the casing too much. You do have to a little bit, but it's not as extreme as some of the other videos that you've seen online about actually modding the IPD by cutting a whole bunch of plastic out. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing to mine, and it's worked for me because it's actually reduced the IPD by about 2 millimeters. So obviously take the covers and the modules out, and the faceplate as well. There's 3 screws to take out, one in the middle, one on each side. Screws may not want to come out, don't worry about it. So where you need to squeeze the most, one is right in the middle here where your nose goes. And the whole thing should just pop apart, because as you can see there's a latch there, and that is the main one, and then there's a couple of latches on the outside as well. But if you've squeezed it all correctly, it should all just pop right open. So be very careful removing stuff, because you've got a couple of very thin cables that you don't want to bend and break, because they would be very hard to get replacements for in a short amount of time. So I'm going to go ahead and just unplug some cables so I can open up the goggles to show you what I've done. Okay, there are 4 things you need to do to get your IPD about 2 millimeters closer together. Very carefully have a look on the underside of the lens module. You'll see that there is a plastic plate covering the actual IPD adjusters. You can pry that off. Sometimes with your fingers is enough, and other times you may need a screwdriver. You'll see that I've already done the mod that I want to talk to you about. So the first mod is this plastic insert actually determines how closely the lenses can slide together. You can pull it out with a pair of pliers, cut it off on each end just over halfway so that the lenses can come nice and close together, so that the lenses actually hit each other's plastic stops. Because with this white plastic piece as standard, it actually prevents the lenses from actually coming in all the way to hitting the ends. But with these cut off like I have, a little bit over halfway, the lenses can actually move in an extra 1 millimeter on each side. So once you've done that, pop it back in, paying attention to which way you've put it in. You'll see a little notch on one side that lines up with the ratchet, which gives you that little ratchety feel as you're actually changing the lens IPD. Something to watch for is when you're actually closing up the lens, getting ready to put it back into the casing, make sure that this ribbon cable doesn't run straight down the side of the casing, because it is going to be trapped when you narrow the IPD, and over time you might actually end up damaging the ribbon cable. So what you want to do is grab some sort of a simple tool and carefully, very carefully, pull the ribbon cable into this middle gap between the circuit board and the lower base plate here of the IPD adjusters. So you want the ribbon cables running into the middle of this gap. A third thing you can do at this point is, I'll show you a photo, but I've actually cut off the very corners of the circuit board itself. There are no circuits around there, so it's safe to do so, and that just stops the edges of the board from hitting the corners of the lenses when you push them that extra 1mm in towards each other. So that's all you need to do to the actual lens module. You're just freeing up that 1 extra millimeter of movement on each side by cutting down that white piece of plastic. So the second part of this is how you're going to place them back into the case. A lot of people will go, okay, I took the lens module out at the narrowest, and my IPD adjusters are at the narrowest, so I'm going to put them back in exactly like that, exactly the same way. That actually prevents you from achieving full movement into the center of the IPD, because at the minimum, these actually don't give you the full movement of the lens. So what you actually want to do is move them out slightly from the middle, maybe about 5mm, put them down, push these in so that they're at their minimum, and lay them in that way. You may need to jiggle them a little, but there we go. So these lenses are now at their minimum possible movement with the extra 1mm on each side that we've achieved. But the adjusters, if you look underneath, are not actually at minimum. So you can still put a bit of pressure on those to push them right in to make sure these lenses are squished in against all plastic stops, rather than being restricted to not being able to move them in any further because of these sliders. Okay, so that's a pretty important point. So that's it, 4 things. We've chopped down the white piece of plastic, we've made sure the ribbon cables are fed through underneath the circuit board, I've chopped off the corners of the circuit board so that they don't hit these slightly canted edges of the lens casing, and when we've put them back into the casing, we've not put them in so that you're already at minimum IPD settings. Okay, so this allows you to actually push them a little bit further. And that's it, 4 things. So now I'm going to put these all back together carefully. Hopefully you remembered the order of the ribbon cables. And that's all you need to do to get the extra 2mm of IPD adjustment inwards without having to cut into any other plastic. Obviously, if that's not enough for your IPD and your whichever goggles you've got, and you need to narrow it even further, you're going to need to do a whole bunch of extra cutting, into the white plastic of the case itself to physically be able to let the lens closer. Your circuit board might be in the way, so you might have to mount that slightly differently. You're going to have to cut away some of that black plastic in between the lenses so that they can move a little bit more. There's a lot of other videos, look up IPD mods for the HD 2s, 3s, the Dominator V3s, and you'll see a whole bunch of plastic being hacked out by a bunch of people. But if all you need is 2 or 3mm, have a look at doing this, and hopefully it's enough. Hopefully my tips there help at least a few people. Good luck and happy flying!